Hello, listeners, and welcome to Shattering Superstructure, a podcast that breaks through the majority opinion and mainstream culture. I'm your host, Alex Arabian, a journalist who explores the value of art for the sake of art. In these interviews, in which I'll have occasional co-hosts, there will be no scoops, no juicy bits, and no hidden agendas, just a safe space in which one can think as one wishes and say what one thinks. And on that note, let's get to the episode. Thank you for listening.
All right, we're back with another episode of Shattering Superstructure, this time with Moby, the talented musical artist, and now he can add directing a feature documentary to his resume. Punk Rock Vegan Movie is a fantastic film. I strongly recommend it. It comes out free to the public on February 1st, which I think is just, a very unprecedented distribution strategy. And we discussed a little bit about his reasoning behind that for making it available to the public for free as opposed to getting a distributor and putting it on a streaming platform where someone either has to subscribe or, pay to rent it. Moby also discusses how he became a vegan in the 80s, and we delve into the punk rock world, a little bit of its history, and the intersection of punk rock and veganism. Moby also talks about Stranger Things. His song, When It's Cold, I'd Like to Die, is featured in Stranger Things twice. Once in Season 2, once in Season 4. And it's essentially used in the exact same narrative scenario, where you think a main character is about to die, and you feel that sense of pain and loss, only to find out that they survive. It's unique, but it's incredibly powerful, especially in the latest season. It's great. We also have some good conversations about where our politics align and the environment, how the meat industry, is a detriment to not only ourselves and animals, but how it affects climate change. And so it's a wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed it. There's even an Elliott Smith shout out. For those of you who don't know, that's my favorite artist of all time. And Moby talks about how he briefly encountered him once, almost a meet. But it's interesting to see his evolution from being in the punk rock world to then branching out and sort of dipping his toes into so many genres. So without further ado, here's Moby. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks, listeners.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Moby, how's it going?
Good, thanks.
Fantastic documentary. I think it was extremely enlightening and really well made. I actually,
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Did you ever watch the show Mr. Robot?
I haven't gotten around to it, but my
okay, so
recommend it.
The first season is really great, and in the first season, there's this recurring plot point about people who hack video on laptops and phones, and as a result, and there's no reason to watch the show. It's not. I mean, you're not missing anything. But basically, I turned off all of my cameras after watching it. I turned them off and put tape over the lenses. So enabling video is really challenging. Like I would have to go out and I have a phone that I use for video, but it's not what I normally use.
Okay. Got it. Man, no, that is scary stuff. I mean, I've heard about that too, actually. I always thought it was like an urban legend, but it's so easy for people to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Um, so when did the light bulb go off for you, that you wanted to tackle this intersection between punk and veganism?
Well, for me, my introduction to the world of punk rock and animal rights and veganism actually happened in 1982. And in 1982, I was playing in a hardcore punk band called the Vatican Commandos. And we did our one and only tour, which consisted of getting into a van with 3 other bands and driving from Connecticut to Akron, Ohio, and playing in a pizza parlor for an audience of about 3 people. But while we were in Akron, we stayed at a vegan squat. Like, we slept on the floor of a vegan squat somewhere in Akron. And I barely knew what vegetarianism was, because I was a suburban kid who ate bacon cheeseburgers and Stouffer French bread pizzas and steakums. I ate any junk food I could get my hands on. And when I remember waking up in the morning in this vegan squat, and they had prepared lentils. And I don't think up until that point in my life, I certainly didn't know what a lentil was, and I had never eaten a bean.
Okay.
But that was my introduction to it. And then in 1984, I became a vegetarian. And then in 1987, became a vegan. And at that point, even though I was really not that involved in the punk rock world anymore, the vegan world was very punk. It was like my friends from Youth of Today and Gorilla Biscuits and John Joseph, all these people in New York who played in hardcore bands by night and worked in health food stores by day, literally. And I had always assumed that everybody understood that punk rock had been a huge part of the story when it comes to the evolution of animal rights and veganism. And then a couple of years ago, I was talking to some people in the animal rights movement, and they had no idea that punk rock had been a part of the evolution of animal rights. And I was like, well, I don't really want to be a film director, but I guess I have to make this movie because no one else is.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And you weren't entirely unfamiliar with, I guess, directing. I think you did a music video for David Lynch, right? Who's also done
I mean, I've
for you.
over the years, well, when I was in university, I was a philosophy major, but I went to SUNY Purchase, which is a performing arts and film school.
Okay.
I don't know why I decided to be a philosophy major at an art college, but it made sense at the time. And that was sort of my introduction to the world of film production and editing and, film stock and cameras. I mean, this was back in the late 80s. So like video barely existed. And yeah, my friends and I used to make super odd experimental short films on Super 8, occasionally 16 if we could get the film and borrow a camera. So I've done lots of weird, call it like dilettante tangential directing, directing my own music videos, directing music videos for other people, but never really thinking of myself as a director. And this movie, it's technically directed, but it's also very idiosyncratic. It's as you know, because you saw it, like it's a very unconventional documentary with a lot of elements, narrative elements and compositional elements that most filmmakers probably would never think of incorporating, like a talking dog or the devil being interviewed on a newscast.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, no, and I love that, just making movies, making art with your friends. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. Even extending to music, your collaboration with so many other artists, I think it probably paid off, um, working on collaboration on a common artistic goal early on with those experimental shorts, I would assume.
Well, there's a way overused acronym, which is DIY. But at the same time, it's the one common thread to all the weird, disparate genres and disciplines I've been involved in is you do it yourself. And if there's a company that can help you, great. But if not, you ignore that and you keep doing it. In the early punk rock days, if you wanted to play a show, you had to book the venue. You had to make the flyers at your friend's office who had a Xerox machine. If you wanted to make a record, you had to go to the local pressing plant with a cassette and have them turn it into vinyl. And the early rave days was the same thing. You would that complete DIY approach. And I guess I've always, because I grew up with that, it's very hard for me not to think that way. And as we know, and forgive me for stating the obvious, but we live in a creative culture where so many people are waiting for someone else to approve of their creative output.
Yes.
Filmmakers, producers, writers, musicians, everybody's sort of like wondering how they can make something that will gain them the approval of a corporation or gain them the approval of an algorithm. And I can't criticize that approach, except it seems so restrictive. Especially I live in Los Angeles and I have friends who have spent decades not making things because no one will pay them to make it, or not making things because simply, they never get the green light to make it. And I'm like, oh, what a terrible way to live. Like, why not just make stuff and love the act of making it? And if anyone appreciates it, fine. If they don't appreciate it, it's not really a problem.
Yeah, no, that's what it's about. I mean, and you're right. So many people just waiting for the cavalry to come, right? And yeah, I think, and going back to your doc, I think some people conflate punk, with really not caring about anything, but that's not true at all. I mean, people can conflate, anarchy and anarcho-socialism to a lack of organization, if they're not familiar with it. But I think punk is really more of a rebellion against authority and being unapologetically yourself. And as you discuss in the doc, questioning everything in society. It's this sort of community of critical thinking, right?
Yeah, that is, it's funny because I guess because I grew up reading lyrics and reading liner notes, I knew that at its core, punk rock is incredibly principled, arguably more than any musical genre that's ever existed. Like, it's really moral and it's incredibly principled, and the lyrics are so thoughtful, but they're also screamed and sung incredibly quickly. So I brought some friends to a hardcore show a few years ago. Mm-hmm. It was Youth of Today and I think H2O, and my friends were horrified because like people were stage diving and moshing, and the music was so loud, and Ray and Toby were screaming at the top of their lungs, and my friends were like, "What is this chaos?" And I was like, "Actually, these are arguably the most principled lyrics anyone has ever written. You just can't hear what they're saying." And so that is another thing I wanted to show in the documentary is like, punk rockers traditionally are seen as like scary anarchists. And the truth is, especially in the hardcore scene, like they tend to be straight edge, and they tend to be really driven by deeply held principles. As you said, that underlying ethos of punk rock and just critical thinking in general is you go out into the world and you assess things, institutions, what have you, based on rational ethical values, and if something doesn't conform, you reject it and you replace it with something better, or you even try and destroy and deconstruct the institution that doesn't work, like in the case of this movie, food systems. I don't know anyone who thinks that the current food systems are good, but yet 99% of the people on the planet completely buy into them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we think we're superior to animals, and it's most animals, I think, Dave Navarro said this and it really struck me, but they're intelligent, they're sensitive, and they're emotional beings. And I think we used to have more of a kinship with animals than we do now, as opposed to just viewing them as a commodity of capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say this, maybe this is something I'll regret saying, but like as time has passed, I have largely come to see animals as being superior to humans.
Yeah.
I mean, last time I checked, animals don't create forever chemicals that cause cancer. Animals don't start genocidal wars.
Exactly.
Animals don't lie on social media. Animals don't lie ever. Like, animals are incapable of lying. Animals live sustainably. Like when you look at like millions and millions of years of sustainable life, like that is a sign of a deeper intelligence that human beings have not figured out, because clearly we don't know how to survive on this planet for more than a couple of hundred years.
That's so true. I think everything started going downhill in the first and second industrial revolutions. I mean, a lot of good things came out of that, but it was just, that's where it started, the mass production, and really sort of amped up just the way we consume, the way we eat, the way we choose
and
our
the irony,
lifestyles.
and I completely agree. And the irony there are two tragically ironic aspects to that. One is that no one's happy.
Yeah.
So like, we are destroying the only home we have. We are burning through resources. We're killing each other. We're killing animals. We're decimating the rainforests to create this ridiculous amount of material wealth, and no one's happy. Like the more material wealth is created en masse, the less happy people become. And it's so ironic. It's like having the biggest party in the world where you burn down your house and everyone hates the party. And the other irony, of course, is every single aspect of this system that we're talking about is contrary to people's stated values. If you ask people, do you appreciate clean water? Do you appreciate breathable air? Do you appreciate a sustainable world where your children will be able to live happily? Do you like animals? And the answer is like, well, yes to all those things. But then everybody's actions are 180 degrees contrary to their stated principles. And it just like, what do you do in the face of that? In the face of that mass self-destructive irrationality, how does anyone respond except with bafflement and complete dismay?
Yeah, and a lot of it too is virtue signaling. It's false.
Well, one of my favorites,
one
of my favorite vegans was Dick Gregory.
Okay.
Who was a very incredibly famous comedian in the 60s. And he has such a wonderful quote. He says, "Don't talk to me about justice when you have dead animals in your stomach."
Damn.
Like, it's real hard to hear about justice when animals who are tortured and killed are literally rotting in your stomach.
Damn, that's powerful. Yeah. And you've got so many great interviews. I know you mentioned some of these folks were your friends, but I mean, from Jane's Addiction to The Damned, Crass, Bad Brains, Youth of Today, Gorilla Biscuits, so many others. How did you go about sourcing these interviews, and was it a long process to get through?
Well, I mean, it was a couple of years of arranging and filming all the interviews, and sometimes it was super easy because some people I've just known forever, like Ray and Purcell from Youth of Today. I've known them since 1981. And other people I just became friends with through the vegan world, through the animal rights world. And then other times it was just being persistent. Like I'd never met Steve Ignorant from Crass, but I just kept asking people, like, does anyone know Steve Ignorant? Does anyone know him? And I finally got an email address and was able to reach out to him. In one instance, like with Scott from Earth Crisis, and Andrew from Fallout Boy, they have a band called Sect. And I heard that Sect were playing in a skate shop in Orange County. And so I just drove down there with my camera and my Zoom recorder to try and interview them. So I show up and I'm like, hey, I'm making a movie about punk rock and animal rights. Can I interview you guys? And their question was like, yeah, where's the crew? Where's the film crew? And I was like, it's just me. Like, 'cause I think some people have been surprised that when I say DIY, I really mean DIY, like for better or worse, oftentimes worse. I was the one booking the interviews, arranging the travel. I'm the cameraman. I'm the musician. I'm the animator. Like I don't purport that I was doing any of these things well, but I just loved the idea of basically either doing it by myself or doing it with some friends.
Right. And I mean, that's really what matters is the desire to go out and make something, even though you don't know if you can do it. You take the risks, you learn, and this turned out to be an amazing documentary. So well done on that. I mean, I know you said you're being humble and saying you don't purport to do those things well, but I think you did do them extremely well, and it was great. But to the interview point, I think Theo Kogan is interviewed, and Luna Chicks could be seen as like an early iteration, if not in the early stages of the Riot Girl genre. I was wondering if you've seen any of Portlandia or their vegan skits.
Oh yeah. I mean, Fred is an old friend of mine, and I wanted to interview Fred for this movie because he grew up playing in punk rock bands. He's from the hardcore world, and he was a regular at my restaurant, Little Pine, and he just didn't feel that comfortable being involved. But and I who knows why, but in any case, I love Portlandia. I can't watch too much of it because it does get a little repetitive, but when it's good, it's hysterical.
Yeah. And I think those skits, they're funny, but they're done completely with love. And if anything, it's a testament to like the lasting influence of straight edge, which emerged from that Pacific Northwest region, and those principles that, vegan is still around, even if Portland's making it a little trendy, or however, whatever statement they're trying to say. It's done with love. And I know that, it seems like it's taken off even more today than say 30 years ago, 40 years ago, for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, when I went vegan in 1987, there were 2 vegan restaurants in the entire world. And now there are more vegan restaurants within a 2-mile radius of my house in Los Angeles than there were in the entire world 35 years ago.
Wow. So was straight edge, was that kind of a turning point for veganism in the genre? Or
I mean, a lot of, if you look at like the Venn diagram and you have like the circle of vegan and the circle of straight edge, there's huge overlap. But not complete overlap. I mean, there were definitely, there are vegans who are definitely not straight edge, and there's some straight edge people who are not vegan, but a lot of people, to state the obvious, were vegan and straight edge. And obviously the XVX logo sort of states pretty clearly, like, straight edge and veganism are very intertwined. And the reason being, going back to what we were talking about, is that idea of question everything and reject the things that don't conform to your value system. And, for a lot of people with, in the straight edge community, it was rejecting idiotic hedonism. And I personally spent decades indulging in idiotic hedonism, and not surprisingly, it doesn't work out. You bottom out and you get sober, and you end up being straight edge after going out into the wilderness for a long time. But those two things definitely, for some people, it's just conforming to what's going on around them. But for most people, it's really the product of ethical, rational, critical thinking.
Yeah. No, it definitely seems like a common thread, not only throughout, I guess, the main sort of wave of punk, but the sort of subgenres that it created as well. And speaking of the Pacific Northwest, you've probably heard of this, but the restaurant Junkyard Dog in Silver Lake in Los Angeles is described as a punk vegan hangout spot. And the reason why I bring it up is not only that, I think the space they took over is pretty special. The front of their restaurant is the Elliott Smith, that famous figure 8 mural to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, or I don't know if Elliott was ever a vegan. He never really discussed his eating habits in the public space, but I think he'd be proud of that mural, being the face of Junkyard Dog, for sure.
Yeah, I met him once in passing, to the point where, like, I can't even call it a meeting. Like, it was at some Spin magazine event. Okay. And obviously he was such a tragic, delicate figure. And I don't know anything about him other than his music and the tragic way he ended his life.
Right. Yeah, and he comes from that milieu of, Heat Miser was, a big punk band in that area as well. And especially because one of his main influences, Elvis Costello, and I don't know what genre you would put Costello in, but he's been a vegetarian since the 1980s. I know it's different than vegan, but yeah, it's an interesting connection, I thought. But it's cool to see, not only Elvis Costello, but you have people like, the Clash's Mick Jones, Joey Ramone was, Ian MacKaye. It's so prevalent. And then you have, I think Henry Rollins did a show that was called, I want to say Animal, what was it called? Anyways, he did a show, I think, for like National Geographic, where he goes and explores humans' relationship with animals through food, and often confronts our abusive relationship towards them. And I'm not sure if he's vegan or not, but I know he's dabbled in it. And so,
yeah, I mean, there's, in the world of, especially like, it's a tricky thing to talk about, but there are definitely, and I don't know if Henry's part of this or not, but quite a lot of people who become vegetarian, become vegan, and then go back out for whatever reason. And all I can say, without judging them publicly or harshly, is it's just so depressing.
yeah.
And oftentimes it's the result of bad science. Like, one thing that I find so profoundly frustrating, the number of doctors who will tell their patients that they have to eat meat.
Right.
And to me, the follow-up question that everyone should ask their doctor is like, oh, so how much time have you spent studying nutrition?
Mhm.
Because what's fascinating is there is not a single medical curriculum, and that's from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, what have you. There's not a single medical curriculum that involves nutrition, unless you specifically study nutrition. So like doctors, you can become a doctor, get your, graduate from Johns Hopkins, graduate from Yale or Harvard, and never once take a nutrition class. But somehow doctors think they're experts on nutrition, even though they have literally never studied it.
Yeah. And well, by the way, Henry Rollins' show, it's called Animal Underworld. I think it's worth a check out. I think it ran for one season in 2012. But to your point, it's like, there are grains like quinoa that can give you like the full nutrients that meat would and stuff like that. And it's so, I think I agree with what you're saying. It's superfluous to include meat in your diet when you don't have to, and when there's so many other alternatives.
Yeah, the only thing that vegans cannot get nutritionally, or that's very challenging, is B12.
Okay.
That's the only thing that, and what's the irony there is it comes from algae. So like, when it exists in fish, for example, and DHA as well, like it's the result of the animal eating the algae or eating, microbes. And so but B12 is definitely, like, as a vegan, that's my one supplement is B12. Because, and I do take a vegan DHA oil supplement every now and then, but so I will say nutritionally, everything else is, to your point, everything that you can get in an omnivore's diet, you can very, very easily get in better, more usable form in a vegan diet. And the fascinating thing, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of nutrition because I just don't know how many people apart from me might be interested, but the two hugely important, powerful nutritional elements, fiber and antioxidants, only exist in the vegan world.
Yeah.
And as time passes, they're finding that like a lack of fiber is behind so many problems. It's one of the contributing causes of Alzheimer's. Like a lack of fiber can cause cancer. It causes heart disease. So like when meat eaters say, where do you get your protein? I'm like, oh, I get it everywhere, from walnuts, black beans, broccoli, quinoa. Like you can't not get protein in a vegan diet. But the bigger question to meat eaters is, where do you get your fiber?
Yeah.
Because there has never been fiber in an animal product. And then the other question, where do you get your antioxidants? Because there's never been antioxidants in an animal product. So that is really, really interesting. And like the more they find out about the necessary importance of having a fiber-rich, antioxidant-rich diet, it makes the conventional American diet look even more toxic.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And you've contributed to so many soundtracks. It's incredible. Bourne franchise. I mean, you did a James Bond song, theme song, Scream, Heat. I noticed you helped compose a lot of music for shorts, kind of helping budding filmmakers.
I don't compose necessarily. I make my music available. I have a website called mobygratis.com that gives free music to independent filmmakers and film students and nonprofits.
Okay.
So yeah, I have tried film composing and I really don't like it. So I love licensing music to people's projects, films, shorts, nonprofits, what have. But I really am thrilled to never actually do film composing because it's such a specific skill, and my friends were really good at it. By way of example, I went to visit a friend at his studio recently, and he was working on some huge budget movie, and every room of his studio has Pepto-Bismol in it. because he's so anxious and so stressed, and everybody he works with, like they're working like 18 hours a day on this film composing, and they're all on Xanax,
Oh
and
my
they're all
God.
battling insomnia. And I'm like, wow, boy, am I thrilled to not be a film composer. I just, sit back and selfishly work on my own music and occasionally license it to films.
Yeah, no, that sounds miserable. But yeah, what's your criteria for, sharing your music with visual mediums, on top of the nonprofit and social commentary documentaries? Does it need to connect with you on emotional level, whatever the
No,
scene show?
my approach especially with Moby Gratis is basically, here's the music, do whatever you want with it, as long as you're not promoting right-wing politics and as long as you're not promoting meat and dairy. But
Yeah.
apart from that, like I love the idea of democratic chaos.
Mm.
So when I, like, for example, with the punk rock vegan movie, like on February 1st or the 2nd, we are releasing it for free everywhere.
Wow, that's amazing.
And at that point, people can do whatever they want with, like, even if someone wants to re-edit it, if someone wants to change the music, do whatever, like, it's up to them. Like, it's no longer mine. Like, it's going out there. I cannot monetize it, and it will be available free for whoever wants to stream it or download it. Partially because that's a reflection of the punk rock ethos. Partially, I don't want to create barriers for. There are a lot of people living, especially in the developing world, who just can't afford Western costs for content. And
Yeah.
I don't want to punish them. I don't want to say, like, oh, because you are below the poverty line in this country, you can't see this movie that I've made. Like, I want it to be available free for everyone. But also, and lastly, I love that spirit of democratic anarchy. Sort of, what's funny, maybe you'll find this funny, I think it's kind of funny, is when I launched the Moby Gratis site, I actually went to Creative Commons to see if I could work on it with them, and they had too many restrictions.
Mm.
And I really like Creative Commons. Trust me, I'm not criticizing them, but I just thought it was funny. Is like, they weren't anarchic enough for me. I was like, oh, I just want to give it away and not control it unless someone is doing something terribly wrong with it, like promoting right-wing genocidal politics.
Right. That's a good way to see it. So would you say then that your experience and your background in punk rock has made you gear more towards left politics, and I mean like left of liberal, which I tend to align with a lot?
See, there's one aspect, which is, again, going back to punk rock, is the punk rock criteria, the way in which punk rock assesses things is incredibly rational. At least from my perspective. Like when Ian MacKaye sort of invented straight edge, it was not arbitrary. Like, it was kind of like, oh, we've looked at the consequences of idiotic hedonism and we're rejecting it. And so my politics, I'm of course very progressive, definitely skewing pretty far to the left on a lot of issues, but informed by reason. And it is a lot of, to really egregiously state the obvious, so much politics is based on irrational perspective, both on the left and on the right, and even within the animal rights community, like throwing fake blood on a 75-year-old woman and expecting her to respond well is maybe not the best way to advocate for animal rights. So I think ultimately there has to be rational criteria applied to political perspectives and also to activism. Like, if our activism is making us feel good but alienating everyone we want to reach, then clearly that's not very effective. So I'm not opposed to alienating people, but it has to be done very strategically. But clearly, just lastly, and I'm really stating the obvious regarding politics, there are really ultimately only two issues, which are climate change and antibiotic resistance. And I do think it's heartbreaking that politicians and people on the left and the right are focused on a lot of minutia when the truth is climate change is going to decimate everything. Like
Yeah.
every other issue we care about requires a stable climate. And so without a stable climate, we have nothing.
Yeah, that's so true. We tend to focus on distractions. Not to say that those issues aren't important, but they're they're
I mean, the
dictated by
comparison
a
I
much
make is
larger
like,
issue. Yeah.
yeah, if you own a house and your gutters need replacing, that's an important issue. But if your house is on fire, you probably have to put out the fire before you can focus on replacing the gutters.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I love when it's cold. I'd Like to Die was featured in two Stranger Things scenes. Were you expecting the Duffer Brothers to call you again for the latest Stranger Things season and basically use
Oh,
it for like the same exact type of scenario?
I have no idea. I mean, I didn't know
Okay.
about either one of those uses until I was watching the TV show.
Really?
And so the first
Okay.
time it happened, I was like, wow, that's good. The first time was in season one. At the end of season one, they used When It's Cold, I'd Like to Die. And I was so touched by that because I was the only artist included who hadn't made records in the 80s.
Oh,
You know,
okay.
everybody else was like, artists from the 80s, and then they included When It's Cold, I'd Like to Die. I was like, wow, that's cool. And then the most recent use of it, I mean, they use When It's Cold, I'd Like to Die. It's the emotional denouement of the entire season, and it's so emotionally intense. Like, friends of mine were texting me saying, like, I'm sitting here weeping while your
Oh,
song is playing.
oh,
So intense. And I
yeah.
wasn't expecting it, and it started playing. And when you license music to something, your assumption is like, oh, it's going to play for 10 seconds and then go away. And in this case, it just kept playing. Like, it just kept playing, and it became more emotional and more intense. So yeah, so it was really incredible. I mean, I'm sorry to be selfish, but it's just very, very gratifying. This
Yeah.
song that was 25 years old, if not 28 years old, would suddenly be exposed to, literally tens, if not hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah. No, I cried. I cried my eyes out. I think in both seasons it was used in. And
Yeah,
it's
that second one, it's funny. The second one, I actually had friends say, like, that was almost too emotional. Like, people were like, that was almost like emotional pornography. It was so intense.
Yeah. And I think it represents uh the upside down in the show, but maybe overcoming depression as obviously its own standalone track and more of a societal perspective. It seems that's what I take out of the song. Yeah.
Yep.
Is overcoming depression, and or at least the feeling of it, sort of the sinking feeling of it.
Well, ultimately, and that's something I sometimes have to remind myself of, is that we were talking earlier about how generally terrible humans are, but underneath it is the vulnerability of humans. The fact that everyone, apart from like psychopaths and sociopaths, like deep down, everyone's wrestling with the same issues. Everyone's vulnerable, everyone's scared, everyone's aging, everyone's getting sick, everyone is dealing with issues of inadequacy. And I sometimes have to remind myself, like, okay, sure, that family might be eating in McDonald's, and I might very easily have contempt for them for filling themselves with dead animals.
Yeah.
But I have to remind myself, like, okay, it's reminding myself to find that compassion for them, because the hidden parts of people's lives are just filled with doubt and vulnerability.
Yeah, it's so true. Whether we express it in more overt ways or we bottle it in and try to be stoic. It's
Yep.
Moby, I really appreciate your time and your generosity with your answers, and your documentary is amazing. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it was really a great pleasure speaking with you.
Likewise, and best of luck on the rest of your press, and
Yeah, looking forward to when it becomes free and available to everyone. I think that's
Yep,
amazing.
I think February 1st. At that point, it's no longer mine.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, thanks again.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
And that's a wrap on episode 6 of Shattering Superstructure with Moby. I appreciate everyone for listening, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Don't forget to watch Punk Rock Vegan Movie for free online once it drops on February 1st. And for those of you who are in San Francisco, it's also playing on the big screen at Roxie Theater. And that would be February 4th. So if you're in town for SF's IndieFest, go online, buy yourself a ticket, and get your butt into the seat of the theater. It's going to be pretty special. You know, I personally saw it on my computer, as it hasn't premiered yet in San Francisco, but I'm definitely going to be attending the big screen event on the 4th, to sort of get that theatrical experience. Anyways, next episode we will have David Arquette, and there's some good tidbits in that one. Keep an eye out for some Scream shout-outs. So anyways, I'll see you next time, listeners, on Shattering Superstructure. This is Alex signing off.